So welcome back everyone. So far we have learned how NMR spectroscopy works, that is how different components of NMR spectrometer work in sync to produce an oscillatory voltage signal, which is then Fourier transformed to generate an NMR spectrum, right? So we have also tried to look at the physics of it, how spins work in sync to generate NMR signal, and then we have also tried to look at the maths of how to make spins choreographed in a desired fashion, and then obtain an NMR signal or obtain information, right? So let us now spend some time to understand what is the information content present in an NMR spectrum. Okay, so let me pull out a sample NMR spectrum. So for example, now what you're looking at is a typical proton NMR spectrum, so 1H NMR spectrum. So for example, over here, so let me also first tell you the molecule. So this is the molecule which is drawn over here. So this is the spectrum of methyl tertiary butyl ether. And you can see that the chemical shift scale is plotted at the bottom as x-axis, and intensity is plotted as y-axis, right? So those are the first initial few features, and then chemical shifts is plotted in delta scale, that is in ppm, and increasing chemical shift is marked with this orange arrow, right? You can also see a signal corresponding to TMS, which is the reference signal, and for which the delta value is 0, right? So delta value, which is the chemical shift of the reference compound, is put as 0, right? Okay. So in addition to that, what we can see is that although there are 12 protons, so 3 for the methyl group and 9 from the tertiary butyl group, so there are 12 hydrogens in total. However, out of 12 hydrogens, so corresponding to 12 hydrogens, we are getting only 2 signals. One is over here, another is over here. So one signal is corresponding to methoxy protons, another signal is corresponding to tertiary butyl protons, right? So that is one feature which is called as number of NMR signals. So number of signals is equal to the number of chemically equivalent hydrogens. So let me write down. So we have chemically equivalent hydrogens. So that means the methoxy protons or hydrogens are chemically equivalent among each other, and tertiary butyl protons are chemically equivalent. So that's why their chemical shifts are same, and thus all 9 protons are resonating at identical chemical shift, giving rise to this signal. Similarly, methoxy protons are chemically equivalent, and all these 3 protons are resonating at 3.2 ppm. So all of them are resonating at same chemical shift, right? So this is how do we know that these are chemically equivalent? So this can be identified easily by understanding that they are actually symmetrically placed. So when I say symmetrically placed, let me draw out the molecule. So let's say if I draw this molecule like this, and I replace each of this hydrogen in this methyl group by deuterium. So let me write down as D C H H O C CH3, and I do the same thing with other hydrogens also. Okay. Right, and then for the third hydrogen also I do the same thing. So now you see that conformation 1, conformation 2 and conformation 3 of this molecule, all three molecules are essentially the same molecules. So that means replacement, it does not matter which hydrogen you replace with deuterium, it will end up in same molecule, and thus these three protons will be called as equivalent, chemically equivalent protons. And thus they will give rise to a single NMR line, because they will all resonate at same frequency, right? So so that is one very important feature, that the number of, we get to know the number of NMR signals. From number of NMR signals we get to know how many chemically equivalent protons or nuclei which are giving rise to NMR signal are present, which helps in determining molecular structure, right? So thus number of signals is appearing in an NMR spectrum is an important feature. So further the two signals, so this particular signal, let's call it as signal number 1 and signal number 2. So these two have unique chemical shifts. So if you notice that one of the so the methoxy protons are nearer to, in terms of their distance, bonding distance to oxygen, are nearer to oxygen as compared to tertiary butyl group, and thus these methoxy protons are actually further shifted downfield in relation to the tertiary butyl protons, right? So this is called as positioning of NMR signal. So positioning of NMR signal is also an important feature which helps us analyze molecular structure. It tells you whether a particular proton or a particular nuclei is shielded or de-shielded, or it is present to closer to an electron withdrawing group or electron donating group, and hence you can actually draw the molecular framework which will satisfy the NMR spectrum, right? So third feature is, if you look at this the intensity, or in other words the integral of the two signals, you see that the methoxy protons have less intensity as compared to tertiary butyl protons. So let me, so integral or NMR line, if this is the NMR line, then intensity is measured like this from here to here. But in most practical applications, when we actually blow up this intensity, it this NMR line, it appears like a Lorentzian line, right? So it is the area under this curve which is measured, and this is called as integral of the line, right? And this integral is proportional to the number of nuclei contributing to the signal. So for example, the number of nuclei which are contributing to signal number 2 are 3, and hence, and the number of nuclei contributing to signal number 1 are 9. So that is the reason the intensity ratio or the integral ratio of these two signals is 1:3. Okay, so if you measure the area under this curve under the line 2 versus under the line 1, you will see that the integral ratio is 1:3. So this is a very, very important feature because what you can do is, you can actually, if you have a proper reference compound of known concentration, you can actually determine the absolute concentration of molecules which are present in your spectrum, right? It can also help you determine the number of protons contributing to that signal, and thus infer the molecular structure, right? Okay, so the fourth property is called as spin splitting. Fourth information, which is which helps determining molecular structures, is spin splitting. So this we have learned what is scalar coupling and all, but let us see an example of this type of spectrum. So if you see here, that this is the spectrum of BrCH2 Br2, and now if you see that the CH2 protons, there are 2 protons contributing to CH2, that's why the intensity of CH2 protons is more as compared to CH. But on top of that, you will also see that if you blow up this area, if you zoom into this area, you will see the fine structure of this line. So CH2 appears as a doublet. So there are 2 lines within this line, within the line of CH2, there are 2 lines of intensity ratio 1:1, and for CH proton, there are 3 lines of intensity ratio 1:2:1. We have understood how these lines come up, and this is a very, very important feature because it tells you what is the number what is the number of neighboring protons which are present in the molecule. So for example, because CH2 is appearing as a doublet, that means I know that next to CH2 is only 1 proton which is splitting CH2 signal in a doublet, right? And then you can also measure this distance, and this is nothing but the scalar coupling constant, which is represented using J, right? This we have all seen in when we applied the Hamiltonian spin coupling Hamiltonian 2 pi j I dot s. So we saw that this J term appears, which basically manifested into the scalar coupling constant, which is the distance between the fine lines, right? So the magnitude of J has a good role playing in structure determination because it strongly depends on the dihedral angle or dihedral angle of the coupled nuclei or the orbital overlap, how strong the orbital overlap is between different molecules, right, or between different nuclei. So the last feature in this series is in the proton NMR spectrum is, so the last feature is line width. So if you see that this is the Lorentzian line, and if you measure this line width at half height, this we have understood, this is R2 by pi, right? This is measured in hertz, right? And why is it important? Because R2 is proportional to tau c, that is the rotational tumbling constant of a particular molecule, which in turn is proportional to molecular size. So if the size increases, then the line width R2 will increase, and if R2 will increase, the line will actually go from this shape to this shape. So if you notice that although the line width is increasing, so here R2 is this, here R2 is this, the intensity is decreasing, right? So why intensity will decrease? Because area under the curve is constant, and this is equal to the number of nuclei which are contributing to that line. So that's why if R2 has to increase, the intensity has to decrease. And if the molecular size becomes very large, then the signal to noise, because the intensities are decreasing, then signal to noise ratio also decreases. And if signal to noise ratio decreases, basically you are losing on the sensitivity, and then your signal starts to disappear. So signals get merged in noise, right? And that is one major limitation which is there for solution state NMR, that one cannot handle molecules which are greater than 20-25 kilodalton in size, because then the R2 values are so high that the signals are too broad to be detected or to be measured systematically, right? So now that we have learnt, we have following information content. So we have number of signals, we have intensity or integral of the signals, we have chemical shift or position of the signals, from Proton NMR. We also see that we can use spin splitting and line width. So all of this information can be actually used to determine the structure, molecular structure of a given molecule, right? So once we know the molecular structure, now let us say that if we are doing any perturbation to the molecule which changes any of this property, so that property will now get reflected as a change in NMR spectrum. So what do I mean by that? So let us say if I am letting the given molecule A is binding to a ligand, so then the local structure where the ligand is binding, so let's say this is my molecule and here is the ligand which is coming and binding, so something like this is happening, right? So now all these protons which are at the site of binding, so here I am marking it in red, so all these protons are now having a different chemical environment. So that is, the electronic density around those nuclei will be perturbed, causing a shift in change in chemical shift, perturbation in chemical shift, right? If there is a perturbation in chemical shift, it will show up in the NMR spectrum. So let me pull out a image to highlight that thing, that how there is a change in NMR line which can be seen. So some of the image is actually going out of the spectrum, but okay, so but we can still see. So now if you see that at 0% of ligand, the NMR line was appearing here shown in red, and it travels like this and then it saturates, right? As the ligand concentration is increased from bottom to top, you see that there is a systematic change in chemical shift, and that change in chemical shift is saturated when there is no more binding happening, right? So then one can actually use this information to plot chemical shift against the concentration of ligand to see how the chemical shift is getting perturbed, and then fit it to a binding equation which is then called as a binding isotherm. So one can actually estimate what are the binding constants, how many sites of binding are present in the molecule. So one can actually get to understand the thermodynamics of binding by doing a simple titration of a molecule and then follow that titration using by measuring NMR spectrum, right? So that is just one example of how that information can be used when there is a perturbation involved, right? Perturbation can be of any type. You can do a temperature perturbation, you can do a pressure perturbation, you can do a chemical perturbation like the one I have showed you. So like that, one can actually go for any kind of perturbation and measure those perturbations using a simple NMR spectrum. So now let us see that what happens when we try to go to more complex molecules. Okay, so this is a case of a simple proton NMR, but of a simple molecule, right? But what happens when we go for a complex molecule which is drawn over here? Okay, so I don't know what is the name of the molecule. I just picked up this image from Google. So here you see that there are large number of protons are there, and each proton is having signal over here, which is nicely split into showing the fine structures. And there are variable line widths also. For example, here the line width is different as compared to here, which shows that the local R2 properties of the protons are also different. So all of this information can be obtained when the molecule is complex, but let's see what happens if we go to a more complex molecule. Okay, so let us see. So this is now a picture of a proton NMR spectrum for a peptide molecule. So this is a 20 mer peptide. So that means there are 20 amino acids which are now fuse together to give a peptide bond, to give a peptide chain. And here you cannot count the number of protons. So what is the total number of protons which are expected? So for each amino acid on an average carries, let's say, 10 protons. So for 20 amino acids you should have 200 hydrogens or 200 protons, right? So one definitely cannot count 200 signals over here. Then forget about what will be the splitting pattern. So you cannot find out what is the splitting of each proton, except for some isolated protons like this. So all you can say is that from the chemical shift information that this is the aliphatic protons, that is the protons which are connected to carbons, and like CH3, CH2, CH, these kind of protons are there. And then these are either aromatic protons which are connected to aromatic rings, or protons which are connected to heteroatoms, for example NH, right? So these are NH protons, for example. But beyond this you cannot obtain any sensible information from one-dimensional NMR. Okay, so from proton NMR. Okay, so let us see that if we go for a more complex molecule than this. So now this is the spectrum of a 100 amino acid, 100 amino acid long protein. Okay, now if you see that so for 100 amino acids you should have 1000 hydrogens. So 1000 hydrogens, again you cannot make any sensible information, you cannot get any information from this, except that, okay, that you have a good chemical shift dispersion from here to here for NH protons and aromatic protons, and these are aliphatic protons, right? So there is extensive overlap of resonance lines leading to all this chaos, right? So this is a very chaotic NMR spectrum, which gives you very bare minimum information about the protein, right? So one definitely cannot talk about structure and all. So then what do you do in such a situation? How do you go about it? So we have learned that there are different properties including number, chemical shift, coupling, and line width, right? So now if we can use any of this information, so based on chemical shift, one can, for example, here, let's say here there are 10 hydrogens giving rise to signal at this point, right? So that means all 10 hydrogens have identical chemical shift. So that means based on chemical shift you cannot resolve these lines. These lines are extensively overlapped. But can we use some other information to resolve this line? Can we use some alternate property to create a second dimension so that these lines are resolved? So so I'll tell you a few examples. So this lines can be resolved. For example, some alternative property can be a chemical shift of protons of carbons which are connected to protons. So for example, if these protons are connected to carbons, then chemical shift of those carbons can be used. Chemical shift of nitrogens can be used. We will see how we can use that. So chemical shift of protons and carbon. We can use the proton-proton coupling, scalar coupling, because coupling constants are specific for different protons, and we can use that coupling constant to pull out these protons differently or to different extent. What do I mean by that? So what I mean is that if you have, let's say this is my 1D spectrum. So I'm just drawing a rough 1D spectrum over here for only for, let's say, NH region. Okay, so this is for NH region from chemical shift, let's say 7 to 10 ppm. Okay, so now each of this proton, each of this peak has 10 protons. Okay, just assume that. Okay, so let's say this is 11 hydrogens, this is 15 hydrogens. So all of these hydrogens, each of this hydrogen is connected to a nitrogen which has its own chemical shift. Now it is not necessary that all these hydrogens will have same nitrogen chemical shifts also. So what I mean is that if my H1N1, H2N2, H3N3 and so on, so all these hydrogens may appear at same chemical shift, but all these nitrogen may have different chemical shifts. So now if I now extend this spectrum to a second dimension, okay, and then I pull this hydrogen to different nitrogen chemical shifts. So let's say this is N1, N2, N3, N4, N5, N6, N7 and so on. So all of these are connected to respective hydrogens which had same chemical shift. Right, so all of these hydrogens have same chemical shifts, that's why they are appearing at same chemical shift, at proton chemical shift. So this is my proton chemical shift scale, delta ppm, but this is nitrogen chemical shift scale. Okay, and at nitrogen chemical shift scale, all of these nitrogens are having different chemical shift, and that is the advantage we are taking to resolve these 10 hydrogens from a single line to 10 different lines, right? So in when a spectrum is plotted in 2 dimension, you cannot really look at so basically the spectrum appears like this. So you have peaks which are coming, the intensity is now plotted in third dimension. So because your x dimension is proton, y dimension is nitrogen, so intensity goes in is coming out of the plane of the board and you're looking from the top. So a peak is now appearing as a contour, right? So this is a contour, each contour represents a peak which is coming out of the plane of the paper, and that will be the intensity of the signal. One can still measure those intensities, just that one cannot visualize those as peaks. I mean, there are ways to do that, but what I'm showing you is a contour plot. Okay, so this is a contour plot. Okay, so now in this contour plot, it is clear that all these hydrogens which are otherwise overlapping in proton NMR spectrum are now resolved in proton nitrogen because their corresponding nitrogen chemical shifts are different. Similar experiment one can use if you have this proton. Let's say if this proton is connected to a carbon, and if you record a proton carbon correlation spectrum, then you will have a different basically then you will have a proton carbon spectrum. So here it will be proton and this side it will be carbon, and now you will have protons which are now resolved into carbon dimension, right? So each proton, so if there are 10 hydrogens overlapped onto this signal, each of this line will get resolved into corresponding carbon lines, right? So I'll show you a sample spectrum of proton nitrogen HSQC, and then it will be clear. So this is a typical experiment, proton nitrogen correlation spectrum. I think I go out of the boundary. Spectrum, and this is called as HSQC. Do not worry about this acronym, we will learn this. One can also okay, so let's not go there. So now if you see that this is a protein which is a RNA binding protein, and this is some 90 amino acids if I'm not wrong long. So when I say 90 amino acids, I mean that I have something like this: COOH, C, R group, then this is H, this is NH, CO, C, R2, H, NH, and so on. So this forms this is called as a peptide bond, and this is one amino acid, this is second amino acid, and this is one amino acid, this is second amino acid, and you'll keep on going. So this is a 90 amino acid long protein, and each amino acid will have a one NH, right? Each amino acid will have one NH. So that means if you have 90 amino acids long protein, then you will expect 90 such peaks in this region, right? So 90 hydrogens should appear in the one-dimensional spectrum, which is drawn on the top. Okay, but what you see is you see a lot of overlap here, and thus this spectra is resolved into nitrogen chemical shifts. So now what you should see is that each contour basically represents a nitrogen-hydrogen correlation. So that means if I look at this peak over here, it gives me a proton chemical shift when I draw the scale up to this axis, and when I draw the scale like this, it reads the nitrogen chemical shift, which is mentioned over onto the Y scale, right? So that means each peak is now giving information about proton on this axis and nitrogen on this axis. And if you count these will be 90 peaks, right? Giving information about each single amino acid. So this type of spectrum where now you have added a dimension to resolve the complexity of the spectrum is called as two-dimensional NMR spectrum. So similarly, here what we have used is nitrogen chemical shift information. One can also use carbon chemical shift information. One can use scalar coupling information to resolve basically anything which helps resolve a particular proton. That means any property which is different in those overlapping protons can be used to resolve the ambiguity, and thus these protons give you a lot of more information when these are resolved and not overlapped like this, right? So similarly, we can go on increasing the dimensions as required. However, there are downsides of that also, but we will discuss that when we'll come to two-dimensional NMR experiments. So when we'll look at the examples of these 2D NMR experiments or multi-dimensional NMR experiments. So in general, these are called as multi-dimensional NMR experiments. This particular example is of two-dimensional because there are two chemical shift axes. One is of proton, another is of nitrogen. One can go on recording a correlation between proton, nitrogen and carbon, and then it will be called as a three-dimensional NMR experiment. You can also record a correlation between proton, nitrogen and proton. It is still a three-dimensional experiment. So we will see all of that in later sections when we'll discuss a few more examples. But the idea is that moving forward from one-dimensional experiment to a two-dimensional or multi-dimensional NMR experiment helps us resolve the overlapping lines, and thus one can analyze the spectrum in a much more efficient way rather than looking at these chaotic peaks, right? So this is all for today, and in next class we will be looking at the maths of how two-dimensional NMR is actually recorded, what all is done differently in the same NMR spectrometer, so that instead of recording a 1D spectrum, now it is recording a two-dimensional NMR spectrum. Okay, so that will be all for today. Thank you very much.